well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Greenlight Bookstore. We are so excited to be hosting tonight's event with Diana Goetsch and Jeanne Thornton presenting their books. Diana will be reading from This Body I Wore, and Jeanne will be reading from Summer Fun, newly out in paperback. So you are all in for an excellent evening. Before I turn things over to them, just a few housekeeping things. If you could turn off or silence your cell phones, that would be great. We also ask that masks are worn the entire time you're in the store, unless you were on our event stage presenting. We also have signed copies of books for sale at the register tonight, and both of our authors will be personalizing afterwards if you'd like. We're also recording this event, if you didn't hear. It'll be available on our YouTube channels tomorrow. But now, on to the good stuff. Our first author this evening will be Diana Goetsch. Goetsch is an American poet and essayist whose poems have appeared widely in The New Yorker, Poetry, Plowshares, and many other publications. Her honors include fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the New York Foundation for the Arts, and the New School, where she served as the Grace Paley Teaching Fellow. For 21 years, Goetsch was a New York City public school teacher at Stuyvesant High School and at Passages Academy in the Bronx, where she ran a creative writing program for incarcerated teens. In her new book, This Body I Wore, Goetsch has written not a transition memoir, but rather a full account of a trans life, one both unusually public and closeted, and a captivating account of one woman's long journey to late transition as the trans community emerges alongside her. Our second author for this evening is Jeanne Thornton, who is the author previously of the novels The Dream of Dr. Bantam and the collection The Black Emerald, both shortlisted for the Lambda Literary Award. She is the editor with Tara Madison Avery of We're Still Here, an all-trans comics anthology, the co-publisher of the independent press In Star Books, and the writer and illustrator of the webcomics Bad Mother and The Man Who Hates Fun. Her work has appeared in Wired and Plus One and the Evergreen Review. Jeanne's new book, Summer Fun, just won the 2022 Lambda Literary Award. It is an epic singular look at fandom, creativity, longing, and trans identity, of which author Torrey Peters said, "I suspect it will come to be considered the pet sounds of trans literature, a masterpiece that feels both astonishingly new and comfortingly familiar."
Yes.
So, you are in for something really special tonight. Jeanne and Diana will be reading from and discussing their books, and you'll have your chance to ask questions after that. So please join me in welcoming Jeanne and Diana.
Thank you, Josie, and welcome everyone. Josie, I don't think the camera can capture the size of the crowd, but that's okay. You know, not every camera can pan the stadium, and we'll work with that. What a pleasure to read at Greenlight, to read steps away from, in a way, where this all began, because my mother grew up steps away from here in Flatbush. And my grandparents lived in this neighborhood at Ocean and Caton, I don't know, decades. So it's a coming home. And I thought, we both got these big shaggy books, and we're trying to choose 10 minutes. And I thought what I would do is read you a few excerpts from a chapter called The Limelight. And this is a chapter that I thought, maybe more than any other, captured the danger of, I can't even call it the trans community, I can't call it anything, but I was cross-dressing in the 1980s and the 1990s, and it's a very different danger from the danger now. And I don't mean to rank them or anything, but it was a little like the Soviet bloc compared to the current fascist takeover, if you could say anything. And so in this, I'm identifying as a cross-dresser. There's kind of no words for us at the time that we would currently use. So that's maybe a trigger advisory in case that matters to people. And it was important for me to just use the words of the era to just try to embody what this surreal thing was that just seemed like my life. The Limelight, 1988. In the ladies' room of the Limelight, there is a lounge, away from the booming strobe-lit dance floor, separate also from the stalls and sinks, a soft-lit room with plush couches where women can set down their drinks, put up their feet, compare notes about their nights, their dates, and warn each other about the creep on the dance floor. It is a place of female refuge, and it's my favorite place in the world. You're beautiful, someone says. Thanks. So, do you go out like this all the time? I wish. Can I see a picture of you as a man? I pull my wallet from my bag and show them my driver's license, where they see a smiling guy with a receding hairline and the shadow of a goatee. Oh my God, look at him. Let me see. Cute. They look at me again. So why do you do this? I just like to. Look at his legs. I wish I had legs like that. In the ladies' room of the Limelight, they are confused about me. Yet, I am welcome. I get phone numbers when I'm out this way, more than I ever get as a man. There's always someone who wants to meet the guy in the driver's license photo. But a day or two later, when I dial the number jotted on the bar napkin, the voice on the other end is startled to get a call back from her wild Saturday night. Remind me again who you were? We met at the Limelight in the ladies' room? Oh yeah. So what were you doing in the ladies' room? Oddly, it made sense to meet women while wearing women's clothes. I only spoke to the ones who came up to me, and when they beheld my most shameful secret and still wanted to give me their number, I felt I'd already cleared a big hurdle. But in the sober light of Sunday, the man in the ladies' room was never boyfriend material. It was the late 1980s. People were terrified of AIDS, and straight women especially wanted nothing to do with a man who could be gay, no matter what he tells you. So I'm going to skip ahead to a more ruminative passage. I was of two minds. Part of me wanted to normalize cross-dressing. Why did my feminine expression have to be deviant? While another part of me suspected its essence lay in trespassing and the charge that comes from doing the wrong thing. If a night out grew lonely or boring, I'd periodically remind myself of the audacity of being in a dress. I'd recross my legs, check for a run, or gaze at my polished nails just to feel my heart quicken. Walking home from the subway, I'd slow down to feel every step, the sublime rocking of my hips and ass with each click of my heels, a woman's sound that stirred my blood, and the whispered touch of stockings as my thighs scissored importantly past one another. These two views of dressing, I'll read one other paragraph with that. My cross-dressing seemed to have the hallmarks of an addiction. Like an alcoholic who develops tolerance, I no longer found it satisfying to stay inside the safe confines of the Fabric Factory. This was this kind of eclectic transvestite bar on 41st Street. I seemed to need more risk, a higher level of saturation to achieve euphoria. The more widely I ventured, the more I risked running into someone from work. It would not have surprised me to see a male teacher among the chasers at Club Edelweiss or the Fabric Factory. A high school student with fake ID could easily wander into Webster Hall or the Pyramid Club and spot me in a wig and a dress. A female colleague might discover me rifling through dresses in the clearance section of Macy's, or shopping the ladies' floor of Century 21 or Sims. Isn't it a sign of addiction when a behavior jeopardizes your employment or compromises your values? These two views of dressing, healthy versus destructive, were at war inside most of the cross-dressers I knew. We commiserated and we were kind to one another. I'd never call what we had community, maybe because we didn't trust what drew us together. None of us understood where cross-dressing came from. All too often, it felt like a perversion and a curse, and the person you commiserated with might disappear for months, or you might. The gay community, which was being decimated by AIDS, was still a community. The pink and black silence equals death posters, wheat pasted all over New York City, told them it was vital to come out. There were nightclubs and businesses, newspapers, districts of cities, and entire towns on Fire Island and Cape Cod devoted to their lifestyle. Whereas cross-dressers had just a few bars catering to us one night a week, bars that blinked in and out of existence. The Fabric Factory wouldn't make it into the 1990s. There was no daytime life for us, and many of us hibernated during summer months when makeup and beard cover would melt off our faces, and wigs and shapewear would cook us. Most of us preferred to keep this pocket of ourselves sealed off from other pockets. We talked to each other about our lives, but there was no thought of ever meeting someone's friends or family, and little chance of us getting together outside of our nocturnal haunts. People were reluctant to give out their phone numbers for fear of who might pick up or hear a message on an answering machine. This was before cell phones and texting, which no doubt would have helped us connect. In place of community, we settled for an evening's camaraderie. And then in the chapter, I go through a couple people I knew, and here's the third person. On a night when I stayed till closing time at the Fabric Factory, Vicky, the DJ, invited me to ride with her to the Vault, an after-hours S&M club downtown. The Vault wasn't my favorite place, but cross-dressers got in for free. Men paid $30, and I could go there to feel like a woman for an extra 2 hours on a Saturday night when I didn't want to go home. In her car, Vicky told me something remarkable. She'd never worn women's clothes until she was 50. That's when a girlfriend coaxed her to try on some of her lingerie during foreplay. And that was it, she said, snapping her fingers. I was hooked. She said that once her mother passed away and her kid graduated college, she planned to be, quote, a full-time sissy. She said full-time sissy like I was supposed to know what that meant. Vicky seemed to be in her own private world. At the Fabric Factory, you couldn't really have a conversation with her because she was so preoccupied with handling the music. She needn't have been. Her outdated playlist was on a single cassette, but she insisted on hitting stop after each song so she could get on the mic to announce a factoid about Tom Jones or Olivia Newton-John in a screechy falsetto that sounded like someone driving a nail through a parrot. In the couple of years that I'd known her, I'd watched Vicky's skirts rise higher and her girlish mannerisms become more caricatured until she was prancing around the bar with thong panties and saggy butt cheeks exposed. She appeared to be growing breasts, though that could have been ordinary flesh rearranged by a cincher, some duct tape, and a couple of push-up bras, a trick many of us knew. Her face looked like it had been cleared by electrolysis. I'd asked her once if she was on hormones. She batted her hand and said, "Oh, come on, I know who I am." The Vault didn't have a liquor license, but you could buy soft drinks in plastic cups to mix with whatever alcohol you brought with you. Each room had a different scene. There were men in black hoods on leashes shuffling between dominatrixes. Women splayed out on wooden tables, getting candle wax poured onto their breasts. There were people handcuffed to exposed pipes high along the wall, or tied to cargo nets and getting flogged. The most haunting space of all was a small dark room with nothing but a bare mattress on the floor. People wore shiny latex, fishnets, combat boots, spike heels, nipple clips, testicle clamps, gags, blindfolds, diapers, and lots of leather. The only ones who freaked me out were the voyeurs, men naked from the waist down, standing near the walls, masturbating. Occasionally I was startled by one of them standing right next to me, working the meat of his penis, as when a water bug suddenly appears in the middle of your kitchen. You couldn't tell if the masturbator crept up on you, or if it was you who drifted toward him unaware. The sight of these men jerking off in public set me on edge, perhaps because I always felt ugly when I masturbated. I mostly hung out near the bar, where I struck up a conversation with a short-haired Latina woman who said she danced with the Joffrey Ballet. Judging from her trim body and lack of extraneous movement, I didn't doubt she was a dancer. She was dressed simply in jeans and a black turtleneck, which made her seem out of keeping with the club, though she assured me she belonged there. She said she was lesbian. "But you're gorgeous," she added, smiling. I returned her compliment, but said that I wasn't into pain. Her dark eyes gazed into mine, with a hardness I couldn't place. "Perhaps we could negotiate something," I said. She nodded yes, slowly, keeping her eyes fixed on mine. We moved to a table in the corner. "I'm not sure what you're into," I began. The smack came out of nowhere, hard across my face, making one of my ears ring. She peered into my eyes, as if to study the results of her violence. I grabbed her hands and squeezed them, clamped down on them like a vice grip, harder and harder, until she grew terrified. So much for our negotiation. On my way out of the vault, I saw Vicky kissing a man who had her pinned to a brick wall. Her mouth was wide open. Her eyes were shut. The passion on her face shocked me. Her assertion, "I know who I am," flashed through my head as I wondered what really happens when you put on a dress. Thank you. And once again, this is Jeanne Thornton, and I love this book.
Thank you all. Oh my gosh, I love that part. I want to go to that bar. I'm sorry it's gone.
Yeah, I miss it.
We'll talk about it directly. I'm going to read you something, and then we're going to talk to one another about different themes and things. Thank you all so much for coming out to hear transsexuals reading things on a Monday, on a 3-day weekend. That is extremely good weather. I can only assume you're all coming from the beach. I was at the beach yesterday, so I'm still kind of like beach fried. But we're going to get through this together. It's going to be really good. I just want to make sure I have enough room to like pace around like some kind of like wild animal or something. Here we go. Is that... Sorry. Here we go. Thank you so much. Okay, now I have like freedom to stalk around. Okay, so I'm going to read you all something from the very beginning of the book. This is a scene in 2009 involving, for those not familiar with the context, our narrator is a transsexual woman named Gala, who likes to write letters, and we're also going to be featuring another character named Rhonda, who's another trans woman who lives nearby in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. Gala is writing a letter to one of her favorite musicians. Just to let you know, in the book, this musician's name is rendered with a B and a dash, obscuring whatever the actual name of this musician should be. It could really be anything. Dear B, with this letter, a sorcery has come upon you. Your will is not your own. You will listen to what I have to say to you. You have no choice. Here is what's going to happen to you. One day, you and your cousin, Tom Happy, are going to form a band. Your brothers will join you in this band. A neighbor will too. What's going to happen? Your brothers will join you in this band. A neighbor will too. The band will be successful beyond what you or anyone considered possible. You will work extremely hard, and through that work, you will produce albums that people will continue to listen to 50 years after their release. And then a crisis will come upon you. A cruel shroud that will settle over your eyes and mouth that will silence you for years. You are still silent now as I write you this letter. But don't worry, okay? Soon, you will not have to be. Soon, your band, the Get Happies, will reunite for a world tour. Soon you will release the album on which your career foundered back in 1967, 42 years ago. You will release the album and it will be perfect. It will be better than the rest. Oh my goodness, technology. The rest of us listening in with our illegal bootleg MP3s will believe possible. It will initiate a world revolution in music. Your reemergence will initiate another world revolution altogether. Believe me, B, that this is going to happen. I'm going to make it happen. Now, I'm sorry that this letter is coming to you later than I planned. You can blame Rhonda. I met Rhonda soon after moving out here to Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and getting a job at the hostel. I guess I should describe Rhonda to you for context, so I guess take a deep breath before you read this next part until I get through the boring description of my life stuff and start talking about you again. And what great and close personal friends we are going to be very soon. I work at a hot spring close to Ralph Edwards Park in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, a town which is named after a game show. The hostel office where I work is like half a mile from my trailer. It is right on the Rio Grande. A few dark-stained dormitories with screen doors and coffee cans full of sand, cigarette butts, cabins, small office, a gravel and a puntia yard with picnic tables cracked by a long sun. Rhonda showed up there today, hair knotted in a high ponytail, shoulders broader than mine, with a weird sun poncho hanging from her wrists, neon pink lipstick, a skirt too tight, platform wedges totally inappropriate for crossing thin sand. It didn't take too much time, maybe a minute and a half or something, to finish up and save my Doom 2 game before I swiveled my chair to meet her. Some Doom 2 fans in the house. Oh hey, I said. Oh hey, I said. I've been meaning to call you. She took her sandy wedge off the doorframe and planted it, flipping her ponytail at me like a graduation tassel. I've got today off, she said. Do you want to do the baths with me? I'm working, I said immediately. Her hand slipped into her purse and drew out a $10 bill. That's cool, she said. I'm going to do the baths anyway, if that's okay. This is a tactic that Rhonda figured out. If she offered to pay to use the baths, then I couldn't actually turn her away by being too busy with work. Because if you make yourself into a customer, you and your needs become unassailable. It is a horrible trick. She put her money away even before I told her I'd join her. The hot springs overlook the river. When I quit pretending to work and went to join Rhonda, she was already in the pool. Her bikini was mismatched, its top red and high gloss, its bottom a complicated construction of 2 layers, one transparent, one opaque, with some kind of fluid thinly trapped between them, along with little cut-out fish shapes. When the suit squeezed, the fish swam. For the moment, the fish were still. I took my sandals off and slid my feet in with her. What's up? I asked. Not much, she said, hanging. I've been sad. Do you want to talk about it? I asked. No, she said, after another moment. It just sucks being trans. It totally sucks being trans, I agreed. So we talked about this topic. This topic is usually what we talked about. How do I even communicate to you what it is like to have these conversations with this other trans woman? The encounter, a mundane setup, an interaction on the street, at a job, at a store, a statement, utterly insensitive, cruel, destructive, and then the eternal debate. Did the person mean to do it? Did it happen because one or the other of us was trans, or because we were deficient in some other way? Were we being too sensitive? Were we? It's not that we're being too sensitive, aren't we? And I know what the right answer is when I'm speaking to Rhonda. No, you're not too sensitive. No, they meant to do it. No, it was totally because you were trans. It's totally fucked up that it happened that way. again, you do for someone what you would want to have done for you. I want someone to do this for me, to tell me that, no, everyone was really against you all along. And if someone stands up for me like that, I can continue to believe without guilt that I am complicit, after all. A friend does this for you. This is what Rhonda came to me, I suppose, to get. She'd been misgendered by her sister-in-law. Being misgendered is par for the course. What we were trying to tease out today was some kind of correlation as to when Rhonda was being misgendered specifically. Like, did it happen more often when Rhonda's sister-in-law was upset with her? Or did it happen more often when her sister-in-law was relatively pleased with her, telling a nice story? If you added up the absolute number of misused pronouns, you got one interpretation. If you factored in more qualitative concerns, like tone of voice, you got another. This is what is so fascinating about these conversations. There is a mystery to them. It is sort of like talking about God, and it's frustrating. By trying to answer questions you cannot answer, you construct a creed with one another. Harrow it just a little deeper into your skin. The whole time we had this conversation, Rhonda floated, just her head and neck protruding, cooking while I sat on the step, my ankles and feet trailing in her waters, my body getting cold. I don't know why they hate us the way they do, she said. I mean, why? What exactly is it that they despise? I mean, I don't know that they hate us, I said. Well, I hate us, Rhonda said, her eyes relaxed. I remember how I felt when I first met Rhonda. I felt for her then the complicated emotion that I feel whenever I encounter another trans person out here in the wilds of the year 2009. The complicated emotion started with a question. Did this girl even read me as trans? Why should I even care if she did? But I totally cared if she did. I felt, while she was looking at me, as if I existed, as if I was possible in a way I didn't even realize I had missed from the city. And no matter how many times I encounter other trans women moving through my life, like little paper lanterns in the shipping lanes, reading the fat kanji painted across their surfaces that promise meaning like nothing else, I will always forget how much I miss that feeling of being seen. I will learn to ache for it all over again every time one of us vanishes. At least that was how it felt in the beginning with Rhonda, for me. I'm going to make some stew for myself for dinner tonight, Rhonda said, toweling off. You want to come by? We can keep working on beating that Mystic Knights 3 save file we started that one time. Yeah, I'm doing something tonight, I told her. Which is true, B. I'm writing this letter to you. I didn't tell her what I was doing. She didn't seem surprised that I was begging off. She just nodded, toweled off, put up her hair, and draped her weird poncho over her shoulders, and went off in her truck, skirt and wedges hanging from her hands, feet sugaring with earth. And I felt lighter as I watched her truck get small, vanish behind tire dust, as if I was getting off work for the day. The time for being present with a friend was over at last. Thank you.
This is the late night talk show segment of the presentation.
Absolutely. I wish we had requested like theme music to come in on it, like
Yeah, really.
a drummer or something.
Yeah, something. So we emailed each other questions to make sure we're relevant, I suppose. And is it okay if I start?
Of course.
I don't know how this is going to go. Maybe we'll have ping pong or, well, we'll see.
It'll evolve.
It'll evolve.
It'll be an emergent property.
That's
Just
right.
hang out.
Evolve and transform. Do you know whose birthday it is today?
Brian Wilson's.
It's Brian Wilson's birthday.
Also Casey Platt's. They're very similar though.
It's Casey Platt's birthday.
Yeah.
Wow. How about that? Okay. And they played, the radio I was listening to was playing the album Smile. I'm wondering if Summer Fun had something to do with Smile.
Absolutely no connection.
No
Very
connection.
Completely coincidental. Completely coincidental.
B dash 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 dash. Let me ask a question though about maybe that. So you and I were guessing the other night who in history might have been trans. You know, Hemingway, Michael Jackson, Rilke. I'm sure there's more. And who currently famous might be an egg. which is something of a parlor game among trans people. I wrote this down, so sorry about that. I wonder if there's more to it when it comes to trans artists, you know, that we look for lineage, and that we might have lineage that might be hidden and would have died before ever coming out, before ever having had language for it. And I furthermore wonder if Summer Fun is a little like that. I mean, Gala is a writer, a sorcerer of sorts, and you know, and B is this musician, you know, who is an egg. And I'm wondering if there's a longing for lineage that went into this novel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was. Oh my gosh, I feel like I want to be careful with like recounting the conversation about who might be trans, because it's like it's probably not a good public conversation to have. But I think it's also the complicated thing about that conversation for me is that I think it's less important. Like for the record, I don't think that like Brian Wilson, whose 80th birthday I think it is today, right, is like necessarily trans or isn't. Like I just don't. Like if someone says they're trans, they are, right? But I think it's the impetus behind writing the book wasn't a kind of like expose or like gossipiness so much as like thinking, maybe in a way that I realized in the course of writing the book, is just like saying that like, oh, I think that person might be trans, is just saying like, I think that person's cool. Like I think I have something in common with them, or that person is like relevant to me in some deep way, right? That feeling of like, there's some common strain, there's some commonality. And I think with art in particular, I don't know, there was something, I remember listening to Pet Sounds with like a candle burning in the year like 2008, like thinking like, how can I possibly tell everyone that I'm like a woman or something? And hearing like, I don't know, like Mike Love singing about like how like his parents are like disappointed or something, just like.
Or in my room.
Yeah, totally. Like there's like, I think that the.
Or God only knows.
Sure. I think that all of those, like, there's like a weird, like Beach Boys references are all like slightly farther at my fingertips. Like they're sort of like, when you finish a book, you kind of like put away your memories of the relationship in an attic to like discover them afresh. It's like I don't have access to all the Scientology stuff I was reading at one point. I don't really have access to the Beach Boys stuff, but there was a period of time where I could have told you the secret gender feelings in like all of these tracks on like Beach Boys Today, or like Wonderful from Smile, or these different things, right? I think the question of lineage is actually something that there's some generational. There was something that was going on in trans literature, I think, at a certain point. I'm not even thinking generational, like, ages or anything. I think that there was a certain period of trans literature that may or may not be out of, or it doesn't even make sense to talk about it in that staged way, perhaps, where there was really a intense longing to look into the past and pull things out of it. I think, like, when I met Imogen Binney, we found out she was working on a book about Kurt Cobain. I was working on this book at the same time, and it's like neither of us had any idea the other one was doing it. There are other projects that are like that. They're like, what if this person was trans? What if this person back? I think Casey Platt actually like did the most incisive one, which is what if my grandfather was trans, which I think is actually what all of these books are like aiming at in a key way.
Yeah, I had an uncle.
Wait, I want to ask you a question. I'm just rambling. I want to ask you questions about your, like, specifically on the topic of lineage in some ways. The thing that, the whole time you were reading this, like, I think I even said it, like, I really wanted to go to this bar, right? I want to, like, the thing that I think is so wonderful about this body I wore is, like, the, like, all of it is wonderful, right? But these sort of, like, early chapters where you kind of are out and exploring this world, and then you sort of, at a certain point, like spoilers for the book, I guess, but like decide to sort of like stop and just not be out in any way, like not like flirt with this possibility of disclosure, accidental discovery, or things like that. And I think that it creates these kind of tide pools of this like trans world of the 80s that you're kind of diving into, and just that sense of like, I think you said before the reading, you really wanted to communicate the danger of it. You really wanted to communicate that. I remember one when I think back on reading the book, I really just think back of this, like you being on the subway, like you being in a cab going to these places and just feeling like at any moment, like your students could find it, like different people. I just want to, for one, congratulate you on that and just evoking this world and this, well, for also doing it at a very scary time, right? Like I really didn't come out until this relatively last and safer, I think, in general to do. I think that's a common thing. It's just like, I just think about like risking that much to go out as like, but I wanted to ask you sort of as someone who is in that world and someone who is in the sort of present like trans like world, like I see you at readings, I saw you at the party the other night, etc. Like what are things that just strike you that you would want to like things that you think we are not doing well now, or things that you think that are like just strict like what is wrong with them? Like why aren't they doing it? I'm actually really curious about this.
I mean, you know, I look at young trans people, and I'm mostly in the circles of trans women, but I just see them as so embodied. You know, and a lot of that is just chronological. You know, you give a 20-year-old a hormone, watch them just take off like a rocket on the 4th of July. You know, you give a 50-year-old a hormone, it's like, you know, a little slapdash. You know, it's all these advantages of an earlier embodiment and of having an atmosphere of, you know, it's just in the air, this trans visibility. I mean, when I'd say for me around 2014, 2015, you know, the so-called trans tipping point, the Times had this series of articles, you know, about, you know, trans people with like some kind of a message board for anyone to post their bio. I don't know if you remember this.
No.
I had this feeling like this was surreal. I did not think this could happen in my lifetime. I mean, it's what I dreamed of. You know, being able to, you know, express myself, you know, in public and this kind of inner, outer sense of completion. And once that happened, and I stepped into this surreal reality and was transitioning to, and was starting to kind of get used to it, then the past looks surreal. It's like, holy crap, was I actually there? And at the time, that was just my reality. I don't know if I'm in a position to say who's doing something wrong, but that Fabric Factory chapter I wrote as a poem first. It first appeared in Spanish, actually. Somebody translated it and it appeared in a magazine in South America. I wrote it as a response to a young trans guy making a speech in 2015 about Caitlin, and we're in this moment, and what he was saying is, you know, we should be more forgiving of people who aren't activists. You know, not everyone's an activist, and you know, we have to, and I thought he was as bad as he thought he was good. And this guy got a standing ovation at the Philly Trans Health Conference, and I'm thinking, he has no idea about what came before him. All these graceless, stumbling people in the 80s risking their jobs for no reason that they could even articulate. I mean, we did not feel like activists. We were just these stumbling baby giraffes trying not to get caught, and, you know, and he's forgiving of us. You know, it's okay not to be, and this guy has no idea who was standing at the gates to allow him to walk so gracefully through them. That's as critical as I get. I actually admire these young trans people, and I really want to protect them. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. That was like, I mean, I definitely feel like still a stumbling giraffe. Like,
Yeah, a lot of
you know,
stumbling.
very much. So maybe there's a line of continuity, I think, in terms of just like working all this out, the moments of doing it.
I mean, one of the things I wrote to you, one of the things our books have in common, I heard a trans guy use this phrase, another trans guy in a different context, use this phrase that his transition was a death gift. And I mentioned this to actually Terry Gross, and that, you know, he was really up against it. It was either dying or transitioning. And I was just struck by that word, death gift. And I had already written the part what became the prologue in my book, where the first time I had suicidal thoughts was also the first time I went out dressed, cross-dressed. And I notice in your book, the first time that Gala writes her first letter, and it's almost like a ritual. I mean, it takes a lot of, it's a form, it's almost spiritual, and she's trying to rouse something. And what she's trying to rouse is something other than her thoughts of suicide. I mean, that's we begin the book, and she's thinking of suicide, and what people are calling speculative fiction. You know, I saw it as very realistic. Someone is imaginatively trying to rescue themselves by creating this epistolary world that is elaborate enough to keep her going, like she's got some kind of inner Scheherazade keeping her alive for the next letter. I guess if you had a comment about that, like you're calling it a tall tale in your prelude to it. I mean, how do you see this spell of letters that even in your voice when you started to read, it sounded like somebody was, casting some kind of spell.
That's really, I had not thought about it in that specific way, but I like the Scheherazade image. I have to sit with it a minute. It makes me reflect frighteningly on my own life and choices about like what I do with my time. In some ways, I think that just thinking in terms of the character, I guess there's sort of like Gala's world in the book is pretty sketchily defined almost by design. I ended up cutting a lot of her, like there was more to her in earlier drafts that I ended up cutting back, thinking there's really just this sort of elemental like no exit situation with her and these two other characters. That's kind of what's important.
Yeah.
But I get this sense of like, this is like, I'm trying to like lean into having more, assuming that if we start from a place of associative thinking, in the clinical sense with our answers, we'll land the plane eventually, you know? But I think that it's not accidental that a lot of this book was written after I had left New York and was sort of living in Texas for a period of time. In some sense that I was still had some connection to the world of transness, which I didn't have a lot of otherwise while I was writing it. So I think this may be some moment where, you know, there's often a time where you're writing like fiction, I think, where you just end up like merging with the character in some way, where the character is sort of doing something. I think that I don't know. I'm reeling from your Scheherazade description. I think it's
Scheherazade.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I'm terrified of how good it is. I don't know if I can
I tend to see literature. If I could say this, I tend to see lit. I suck at science fiction, and I suck at reading science fiction, and the metaphors are fantastic, and hats off to great science fiction writers. But I tend to read things from a realism perspective. And so many trans people have this interior fantasy life as their only life. You get a lot of role play gaming, you have a lot of coders, you have a lot of back of store occupations. And but then when I look at this book, I don't see it so much as this weaving of some kind of surreal alternative reality. I just see it as someone trying to save themselves through the activity of writing these letters in that way, and I was just wondering how you see it.
Yeah, I think I am now forced to see it the way that you do, because it was really good. Like the Jeanne who started this reading is different than the Jeanne you see now. But I think that there's definitely something that was important to me in wanting the ritual to be also a real ritual. Like she really thinks that she's going to, in a way that is, to be clear, very distinct from what I thought in writing the book, right? Like she really thinks that she's going to like save this other person, that there's this musician that she really cares deeply about, and that she's going to write these letters and like force this individual to like come out and like reveal their secrets and sort of like initiate this revolution that was kind of like paused back in the 60s in the book. Like she really does think of it as literally a magic spell and then sort of abandons that framework over the course of it. Like literally does not complete that ritual and starts a new one sort of in the final pages, which I think is maybe, I don't know how that's important, but I think that's important.
Yeah.
You know, that it's like recognizing that there is these, I don't know, these sort of grand plans are not as important as what is in the moment in some ways. Which brings me to your book, because, and your practices as a teacher, which I'm delighted to talk to you about, because there's, oh my gosh, there's so much in the book that is about just how you, over the course of years, like I feel very excited just to have you talk about my book and these writing things, because you seem like you really, really know what you're talking about with writing in like all of these different ways. I mean,
my plan is working. They don't suspect a thing.
Well, the book itself is really evidence of that, because the book is delightful, right? But it's like sort of, I was really struck by this one chapter in particular that I wanted you to talk about, maybe in the light of what we've been talking about writing in order to save yourself, writing in order to create these narratives over time, right? Which is specifically the chapter about once you leave teaching at Stuyvesant, which I told my friend Kevin I would not ask you questions about Stuyvesant, just because Stuyvesant is the school where they filmed the 1997 motion picture Hackers, which is very important to me. But I'm not going to ask you about Hackers. I'm going to ask you about...
Is that right, Rebecca? They filmed that? Okay.
I remember that.
Yeah, like I have lots of memories of just like looking at the halls of Stuyvesant and like the water sprinkler going on because the pool on the roofs from the lake and all this different stuff. But anyway, I want to ask you about when you were teaching in with the foster, the prison system.
Prison, yeah,
like
the
it's
jail.
like the jail, right. It's two are distinct. With under the very intense conditions that I was really struck by, the kids coming in and you not knowing who would show up into the class on any given day, and who would be, how long anybody would be with you, because sort of cases are doing, just these constraints that you can't actually talk to them about the circumstances that brought you there in the first place. The question that I really want to ask you beyond just wanting to hear more about that, because that part of the book is just really fascinating, is how you adapt that just to teaching writing or thinking about writing of trans people specifically, and our sort of varied circumstances, our sense of ourselves is potentially different at any given moment. If you see a parallel at all, or if there's like, I don't know, anything you want to say relative to that.
Teaching in the jail and writing about trans people.
Or teaching, or how you would, like things you would say to trans writers necessarily, were you to be teaching them. I don't know if you are or not.
Yeah, I do teach trans writers occasionally. I might teach whoever comes.
Okay.
You know, kind of like the jail. They just send people in and they arrive in their jumpers and you see them. It's interesting, you know, trans writers, you know, are showing up more and more. They're showing up, I was just talking to two people who, you know, did an MFA at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and they seemed like they were treated well, and I was really happy to hear about that. I think I've talked to a lot of young trans writers who are extremely concerned if they will get a fair shake when they submit to editors. And they're also concerned on how to take notes, how to take criticism and corrections from a cisgender teacher. You know, so much of writing is a negative enterprise. You know, you make mistakes and you evolve and you learn from your mistakes. It's pretty straightforward that way. But then, you know, how do you know if the correction you're getting is because that person's blind to you? You know, and not a correction at all. And how do you trust it? And I think the advantage of trans people teaching one another in a kind of a sanctuary situation is that we could actually be tough on each other and have a lot more ability to do that. Not that we can't have our own internalized transphobia, but that's a little to the side. And we actually can, you know, look at each other and give each other the tough love that, you know, sometimes good teachers need to do. You know, so I think it works out that way. At the jail, I think what I learned at the jail was how to be field sensitive. I tend to be a field insensitive teacher. Field sensitive teachers feel like they have to get to know the kid before they feel they can teach him. Okay, have to know that you really love, motorcycles or fashion or something, and then I can get next to you and motivate you that way. That's field sensitive. Field insensitive is when you just lead with the subject matter, and your love of the subject matter could come through. And if they love the subject matter, that gives you this arena to love. And one's not better than the other. And at Stuyvesant, it was very field insensitive because these kids just were so intellectual. And they're real tough mentally, and they like that kind of tough love. At the jail, this is where people felt the worst about themselves, was at school. So I had to learn how, and there were some tough knocks for me, I had to learn how to be field sensitive, which wasn't my first reflex, and just keep it real gentle, as much as I can. So that's a little bit about that kind of teaching. But I think if I had a classroom of trans students, I'd be field insensitive again, because we know we love each other, in that sense. Can I fire back a question at you?
You may fire back.
What I'm fascinated with, and I've experienced this firsthand being in the closet so much, is, and maybe Mackenzie can help me, is interiority a word?
Yeah, it's a word.
That's a word?
Yeah.
Because I usually don't use words like interiority.
But
But your book makes me want to use that word. I mean, again, back to this interior reality that so many trans people, tend to occupy. So the character B, we know why he's interior. He's in the closet. And, and we know the actual B had a series of nervous breakdowns and was reclusive and never went on tour, and meanwhile composed these masterpieces, and no one actually understands how this guy works, this guy being Brian Wilson. But this B in your book has a reason to have this inner world that slowly gets expressed and then shut down, etc. At the same time, the letters written by Gala, she's out. It's 2009, and yet she also is a very interior person, in this minimalistic world where all the life is on the inside, and do you think that there's something organic to trans people about being such interior livers of life, or is that more about danger and trauma and being forced to be inside? Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me try to say it back to you. You're wondering if there's something inherent to us as a population that makes us more interior, or if that interiority is completely situationally imposed on us in some ways. I definitely think I would be really hesitant to make categorical statements about all of us, right? I just feel like it's just not something as anyone who listens to me try to tell an anecdote knows, I'm painfully non-categorical about it. Here's the story I will tell you about a day in 1985 or something. I think that I want to talk about your book in light is a way of answering this, right? Because there's that scene of the scene of actually when toward the end of it you turn back to transition and decide no, this is what I have to do. It is in a completely interior context. You're at a retreat and you have this moment of this spiritual experience that's I can't ignore the reality of the spiritual experience, right? And there's sort of the version of the same kind of coming out moment for B in the book is I will reveal is related on something similar that happened to me, not exactly the same way, right? But it was a similar moment of you ignore this spiritual thing that's happening at your peril, and you follow the truth of it independent of danger. This is why I think that I don't know another thing I want to talk about with your book is just the let me save that, but I think that all of us have at least had that experience of trusting something that's I don't think there are any hard-line materialist trans people or something, right? People are on the level of God. I'm wrong. But I think there's the experience of...
We come in all shapes and colors.
Okay, a schism has formed during the very day. Well, perhaps we should open it up to the pod, because I feel like it may be close to the time to turn it around to audience questions.
Okay, who has a profound question? We're ping-ponging it out to you. What does this mean, Josie?
That's my 10-ish minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We can do that. We can also talk about spirituality, but maybe someone out there has something they're wondering about.
Could be about materialism.
Let me say something a little bit about the spiritual scene. So this is called cracking, for those who don't know, or cracking of the egg. When you're out, and you can't kind of put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I mean, you're really cracked, and you just now have to transition. You see what can be unseen. You use even that word. Somebody sees something they can't unsee. So I'm on this solo meditation retreat for 12 days, and what happens in Vajrayana Buddhism is that you visualize, and it's called Yidam practice. You visualize this elaborate, perfect being, and there are several of them. They're legendary, and they're practiced on, and you say this chant. Mine was Vajrayogini, and so they're perfect, but at the end of the practice, you dissolve that being back into you, so you're perfect. But if you start with your own perfection, you soon have a megalomaniac, or a theist. And if you never get to perfection, you soon have a cult member, because you vomit up your spirituality to the sage on the stage. So what happens is, alone, you visualize this image of perfection that's other. You externalized, and then you bring it back into yourself. And when that image becomes female, all hell might break loose, if you're me, because then it's you. And then, like you're alone. There's no reference point. It's like, okay, is it real or is it not? Is this the most real thing ever? Or is this the most illusory thing ever? And you don't know.
Can I tell you what really struck me about that scene? Because all of that, it's the fact that it wasn't just a female figure. It's like a girl asking for help.
Yeah.
Like she's in a room and she's saying like, I've been here a long time. Are you going to help me? Or are you not going to help me? Right?
Yeah.
That was just like, I don't know. That still just stays with me.
Yeah.
That it's not just a female image. It's specifically one like asking like, how long can you not help me? Right. In some ways.
So I was an abused kid, and the whole middle section is about that. And so this girl comes in, and she kind of, could use a meal. She's starving. She's held hostage, and maybe partly it's I've shut her down, but partly it's these two themes of child abuse and transness that it was so hard to tell the difference between the two, because they present in very similar ways. If you're a survivor, and I'm sure we have them, of incest, you can be very confused about your sexuality. You can be very interior. You can be very isolated. And if you're trans and in the closet, you could have all of those same symptoms: dissociation, sexual dysfunction, all kinds of things. And so in that one moment of that girl saying, are you going to come back for me? The two were coming together. I didn't realize that at the time, but when I wrote it, it started to, make sense. That here she was. There's no doubting this was a female person, and as bad off as she was so much more certain of who she was than how I felt. It's external image. She was totally sure of herself. I mean, this was a wisdom figure, in that sense. Your book ends with very much the same ceremony. I had to surrender to this spirituality. You call it divesting, I think. What do you call it?
It's like divesting your inheritance. Like basically thinking you have this in all these different senses. Like we have this American inheritance, we have these expectations of musicians, like all the different ways it's overloaded in the book.
Yeah.
But like divesting the things you've inherited, right?
Right.
And sometimes you do that by not giving them up, but by like divesting your attachment to them.
Right, and then it's a ceremony though. You burn, well, I don't know, maybe this is too much of a spoiler.
No, go for it.
There's a fire. Does she burn the letters? Does she not burn the letters? But it's like, good luck, B. You gotta make your way, I've gotta make my way, and she has to somehow dissolve this whole spell back into her. It's very Vajrayana in a sense.
Oh, thank you.
Or maybe I'm very Beach Boys.
I think it can be a little of both. Oh, we have a question.
Yeah, I have questions. I was trying to think of a way to make it a strictly literary question, and I think I have failed.
No.
So it may be a slightly worldly question. I apologize in advance for this. I'm really interested. Like, I actually haven't read your book yet. I'm generally allergic to hardbacks, but excited for it to be in paperback. I'm also excited for like there to be a book that is talking in some detail about like kind of cross-dresser scenes, right?
Yeah.
But if you have someone who was like maybe kind of part of those, because like I remember that, like, you know, and that was like such like a kind of, like it was such a policed and also such a contested kind of border that like cross-dresser, transvestite, transsexual,
Holy
those
crap.
identities were
Yeah.
like so, they were like such viable identities, and there's an extent to which like I now feel like, you know, kind of Blair Bith kind of washed away with the tide or whatever.
Right.
And so I'm interested like both in this question of like, in the world, like where does that world go? Like does that keep existing? What happens with it? But also this question of like, what is that as like kind of a literary possibility? What remains to be said
Yeah.
about this like kind of, because it's inherently, I guess, in some ways inherently a self-submerging identity. One of the points of being a cross-dresser was that you didn't tell people you were doing it, right? So like on the one hand, what happens at like Fantasy Fair or something,
Sure.
but also, what is there to be said still about this? How can it be written about?
Well, I think, given your accent, that sounds very literary. I get letters, you know, now that the book is out, I get these emails from people who are cross-dressers, but they can now see themselves on the trans spectrum, you know, whereas before they didn't. I remember when I started seeing myself on it, I took up that prefix when it started becoming a word, when I was still identifying as a cross-dresser. That word was helpful. Okay, I'm part of this. You know, it was a helpful step. So they're writing me these letters now, these emails, they're like ransom notes. I mean, they come to me in this default courier. And some of them remember the fabric factory. Somebody in Seattle and somebody in St. Louis, they were there. They couldn't even believe it was real until I wrote about it. They still have these hermetically sealed retreats. Femme Fever is still going out in like Ronkonkoma. You know, Keystone at the Crossing. There's more of a range though, like you're saying, there's more of a spectrum there, but a lot of this are, you know, these are uncles and grandfathers circling their calendar for months in advance, going to the cruise, going to that thing in, you know, Provincetown or in Arkansas. I think there will always be that, Kat. I think there will always be late transitioners. Maybe a little fewer, but I think there's something about blindness and coming to it internally. I kind of think there will always be that. And I also think that it's the late transitioners who maybe are the most in touch with the generations, the millions of people who never got to transition. I think the grief of late transitioners is dipped into that ocean of these people who live these truncated lives. I do think we have a continuum. I do think cross-dressers maybe have less shame, but there's still a lot of people hiding out. You know, I don't know. Did you want to follow up, or did?
No, my only follow-up is like, maybe you haven't read it, like I wanted to ask about that Rachel Pollack essay about this Trans-Central Station, but that's like one of those like very specific like questions you ask afterwards, rather than a question you ask during something. Like, can you talk to me about this text I like?
Bar. Yeah, no, absolutely. I get really upset when trans women in particular, try to shame cross-dressers. I do not like that at all. You know, that cross-dresser saved my life. as far as I'm concerned. You know, and there is no room for shame of anyone, you know, in that sense. Do you want to, because we've all had our own
Jeanne, your book
paths.
is about the 60s, right? So in some ways you're like also dealing with these questions.
I did so little research. I just made it all up. I didn't even know that cars didn't fly them. You know? Like that was just as big a surprise for me as anyone. Like, called me on that. But I don't know. I think that the only real thing I have to add to this, other than remembering the tale, like I remember that was still important, even when I was going to like the center in 2010. Like there was definitely like a political, like who got to speak. Like some like cross-dressers would be told at a certain point, like you shouldn't have a debate on like, I don't know, where we go to dinner or anything like that because of this. Like there's this idea of like you're imperfectly committed means that you shouldn't have a voice in the politics. I think is still a very active. Like it's almost like so like we've so moved toward the normalization of like the out trans person in some ways, and the active trans person that I think it runs a risk of eclipsing that in the same way, whereas I do think it is still very alive. I also think that those like, you had the question about what is there still to be written about, right? The extent to which it's still a living thing means there's stuff to still be written, but I also think like, I don't know, like Don Quixote is not, you know, like knight errantry is not current in Spain, right? I think there are worlds about people attempting to hold out, like live according to a thing that's out of vogue is actually a very, very important subject for literature.
I'm like so here for like a big novel set entirely in like cross-dresser communities.
Absolutely.
Like so here for that, please write it.
Well, I would love to visit some of these big events and just be there with them, you know, because to me that, you know, the publicist asks you, okay, what associations are interested? I said any town with a cross-dressing support group. In the back of a church, I'm interested.
Totally.
I wonder if we could do like a tour of these speaking events, just at different cross-dressing fairs and backs of churches, or if that's weird. It'd be fun.
I mean, the whole section on B's kind of experimenting and coming out. You know, by this time he's wealthy, so his own house, he literally paints over the windows. I mean, and starts to just wear these clothes, these sparkly gown type thing. He starts to show up to rehearsal, and by this time he's just an eccentric genius. I mean, or you know, she's Diane, and no one can do what she does, so the band kind of tolerates it because that's their cash cow.
Yeah, that was like a lot of the weird stuff to write in the book is just how money lets you, like the idea that you can, there's a democratization of who gets to transition.
Yeah.
I think effectively over time, whereas before it's like, and of course people transitioned all the time. There's like, one of the things that I wrote that I never actually finished or got to sell in writing, they make you do these little articles when a book comes out, and like, no one took my articles. So like, but one of them that I was writing, that like how you wrote this, like about Casa Susanna up in the Catskills versus the Compton's cafeteria riot. Both of them roughly contemporaneous. And like existing as trans people with different ways, but it's one of them is a network of mutual aid based on bodies, and one of them is a network of mutual aid based on letters. Cal told me my article was too mean. Like, I couldn't figure out a way to make it not finished or something. There are very distinct differences between that being. I don't know if I have a point so much as like thinking about that being something I was really consciously thinking of in the book, about the fact that money gives you privacy, which gives you the ability to experiment, and sort of like talent is also, particularly in the music scenes, we sort of allow things of people who can make us money through their talent in some ways that we don't allow other people.
But you know, you capture B's fear, awkwardness, how B is being perceived, that whole world of a cross-dresser just taking these tepid baby steps in the middle of, I mean, it's like they're walking on broken glass. It's electrified. It's just, and you capture it. You know, they've always been trying to divide different kinds of trans women. You know, and Dr. Benjamin had these quadrants and these categories that were just elaborate, and I could never relate to it. But I do think I relate to early versus late transitioner, and I mention it at the end of the book. because it's a book about late transitioning, and why did you not see this? Why were you kept from this for so long? And there are the people who cannot conceal it, and they have to come out. Someone like Sylvia Rivera getting thrown out of her house at age 12. And then there are the people who can't unearth it, who just, try so hard to live this male life. And to me, those are two categories that may always be here. And they're both totally sacred. Even though the late transitioners are seen as, the ugly ducklings or whatever, I'm here for them.
This is a good note to end on. Do we hand it back to you to close it out? Or?
I was just going to say, can we give it up one more time?